All right, welcome everyone to this week's Rising Tide Foundation lecture. This is going to be the last lecture we have before Christmas, and I thought that this would be a really wonderful point in time since we've been already going through the venture. We've been venturing through some recent history regarding the artificial creation of the Cold War, a lot of the incredible struggles by people who had a broad and beautiful courageous vision for what the world could and should have been and were cut down. We've investigated a lot of these things over the past 3 weeks. And the figure of John F. Kennedy has come up a few times, but never quite treated in depth in any way. But I thought that since we were now at a point when society is really being tested, and a lot of the consequences of having tolerated very foolish and immoral ideas for far too long are now becoming felt. I mean, many people around the world for many years have experienced grave injustices, a lot of pain. We've sort of had it easy for the past generations. And so here we are. There's a certain storm that's already begun. There are ways to navigate through this, but you cannot navigate through the minefield, through the storms, if you don't have a strong sense of the principles of the past. And that's why everything we've been doing with the Rising Tide Foundation for the past couple of years, especially with these lectures, have all been to try to shed light on different elements of ancient history, science, the battles in science, the battles in literature and art, and always at trying to zero in and triangulate at this question of what is it that gives human beings the ability to create our future in a better, ever more perfect way, which is something which is not, when we act in accordance with that truth, we not only are happier, we're not only more satisfied with our existence, but we're able to tap into our deeper spiritual potentialities that otherwise we would not have access to if we adapted like beasts in a law of the jungle type of scenario to an empire. So I was really, really happy that a few of my friends encouraged me to read an article that went viral just a few weeks ago on the anniversary of John F. Kennedy's death, which really introduced me to the writings of Edward Curtin, who has been at this for a long time. And this was a really special treatment of JFK's life. And more broadly, what was it in the culture that allowed for the torch to fall and not be picked up again? And Ed and I have had a couple of conversations, and I've just been so impressed with his spiritual and mental insight into JFK and many world historical personalities, but also his ability to diagnose things that a lot of people are afraid to look at. But you just have to see that if you're going to be able to find within yourself the strength to actually carry on the type of process for the good that humanity so desperately needs. So Ed is he's a sociology professor at the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts, if I understand correctly. He's produced bountiful articles that are found on his blog, which is going to be in the description of this video in YouTube, so people can go to his blog site. He's recently published a collection of his essays in the form of a book called Seeking Truth in a Country of Lies, which people can also purchase. I'll make that link available in the description box. And also the associated JFK article that I was really moved by. So Ed, I'm not going to say too much more. I know you have a lot to go through at the end of the presentation. If anybody has thoughts or questions, just put your name like usual in the chat box and I'll call upon you in queue. Ed, go for it. It's all yours.
Well, thank you, Matt, and welcome everyone. I'm glad to be here. Rather than call this a lecture, I'd rather just say it's a talk. And I feel like I'm talking to friends and would encourage a dialogue on all these matters once I shut my mouth, which mercifully won't be too far away. And I thought to begin, it's one of the things that I believe very firmly is that all beliefs and ideas, while they have this social and cultural dimension, also, and even our obsessions and our interest in things come out of our personal experiences. And so a little background to how I got involved in all of this on a personal level. The title of this talk is Propaganda and the Social Relocation of Death, which may confuse you, and I'll try to explain it. But going back to my background, my intellectual training at least, I studied the classics as an undergraduate in college. And from there, I went, Greek and Latin literature. And then I went to a study of theology. And from theology, I went to sociology. I should say also in undergraduate, I studied philosophy as well, and English literature and all the arts. And so I have a diverse background. All of those influences really intersect to result in what I've done over the years. Matt said I was a professor or am a professor at Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. I'm not any longer. I retired a few years ago, right before the whole COVID mess. And I'm very glad I did, because I wouldn't be a person to be doing any online teaching, which is anathema to me. I'm a person-to-person teacher, or was, and I think that's a crucial aspect of all of the issues that I'll try to touch on here. But as a sociologist, my specialties were are still the sociology of knowledge and the sociology of religion and politics. So as I continue to talk, you'll see how all of these things intersect. So the first thing I wanted to say was, or to talk about, is this what I see as and I'm sure you see this also, a massive paradigm change that has occurred, at least in the Western world, over the last many centuries, in particular, starting in the mid-1800s. And what I'm going to say is premised on the belief that all cultures and all societies live first and foremost by myths, or stories, if you wish. And these overarching myths or stories are central to the symbol systems that develop out of them, and which people use to make sense of the world and to make meaning and to feel as if their lives are meaningful. And at the root of most of these myths is the issue of death, of course, because it's the, how shall I put it? It's a fundamental aspect of life. And as we all know, we're born dying, and people do die, despite the technologues who believe that they will live forever. And we need to make sense of that fact that we die. So if we go back, and I'll try to do this briefly, because this is the outline or the frame for what I'll say about some other things, especially the issue of propaganda. But as you all know, we go back to, let's say, Copernicus, 600 years ago or so, when Copernicus said that the Earth was not the center of the universe, the sun was. Of course, this struck a note of dread in the church authorities in Europe. Of course, he died, and then following him came Galileo, who confirmed Copernicus' theory. And the world of Western Europe and Christendom started to turn upside down. And then following those two guys, there came Isaac Newton. I don't know if you know this, but it sounds like a joke, but his middle name was Fig, as in the cookie Fig Newton. And the reason for this is that Isaac Newton actually didn't discover the law of gravity from watching an apple fall. It all went back to his childhood. When he was a young boy, he was very fond of figs, and he was always eating figs. And his mother said, you know, Isaac, you have to stop. It's obsessive. You're eating too many figs, and as a result, you're pooping too much. But the kid was fascinated with figs, and he was fascinated with poop. And he noticed there were no toilets as we have them today, that poop always went down. And later in life, when he was contemplating this, he realized that, that's what I'll call gravity. And you probably know he called it gravity because poop goes down, and so do we, into the grave. And so there was this connection right there in the scientific revolution. I'm only joking, but it seems to make sense if you think about it. He's not really, the cookie's not really named after him, but the connection between the grave and gravity is I think, of profound importance. During the last, or since then, and the scientific revolution that came from it. So then we jump forward, if we jump forward to the 1800s, and we think of what took place in the 1800s, Darwin, the relativization of knowledge, which is key, the idea that social knowledge is relative and it depends on time and place. And the Freudian revolution, which was the psychological counterpart to this. And so what people once thought was absolutely true, and what the sociologist Peter Berger once called the sacred canopy that protected us, this religious sacred canopy, was now under assault. And so then over the last 150, 60, whatever, 70 years, science has made tremendous inroads on the religious worldview. And as a result, science has, for many people, replaced religion and the sacred dimension or the spiritual dimension as a way of, as a myth. And tied into this development intimately is the development of technology. And the technological revolution, or you could say also the materialist revolution, which was tied into the development of science and technology, made great inroads again on the traditionally spiritual understanding of existence and the way of finding meaning in life. Of course, it was never able to answer the question of death until today, when we have these what I would call psychopaths, billionaires who are telling us that they are going to discover the secret to life and just take 200 vitamins and you can download yourself into a computer and so on and so forth. But the technological revolution actually brought us World War I. I forget how many people died. What was it? 6 million died because of this great technological improvement with the Gatling gun and barbed wire, in which all these young men were killed during the war. And then if we move ahead in time, we have the Holocaust, a technological feat of evil. And we have the development, the most important one, nuclear weapons. And so the traditional power of death, life and death, now was transferred from traditional belief in God to human beings. And this created tremendous ongoing anxiety in the world, where the world could be blown up in an instant because of these nuclear weapons. It's been so frightening for people, I think they can't really think about it. As recent events in Ukraine and in the Black Sea, and the US with Iran and so on and so forth show. But these nuclear weapons are there today. They're completely tied into computer technology, or not completely, but 98% tied in. This is how this stuff works. And the world is at this great risk of a nuclear war. But simultaneously, if we go back down through the years, and if we start, let's say, post-World War II, the technology that developed allowed for a tremendously increased ability of the powerful forces that have always controlled the world, the wealthy, and those with the most weapons, whether that was swords and spears or today nuclear weapons and big armies and guns and so forth. But it allowed them to do propaganda on a vaster scale in much subtler ways that would go from the radio to the television, to films. Matt had mentioned good films. Well, many films are pure propaganda. To, of course, the internet, and today straight to the little rectangular boxes that most people carry around called cell phones, which are key to the digital revolution, but they're key also to the propaganda revolution. So this is just a little bit of the frame that I see that this crisis has developed. And it seems to me that we are in a spiritual war for a rediscovery of the sacred dimension of life, which, of course, Matt mentioned the JFK assassination, which is just one piece of the whole story. Whether we go from JFK to 9/11 to COVID, I see them all connected, and I see them all connected in a technological sense as well. So that's the first point that I would like to make. If we go to the JFK assassination, which I consider to be the foundational event of the modern era. Here was a man who was killed, and I don't hesitate to say he was killed by the Central Intelligence Agency, who organized his assassination. And he was killed because he was turning away from the warfare state towards a peaceful state. And he had a dramatic transformation while he was in office, what we would have to call a spiritual transformation. And I'm sure many of you have read James Douglas's book, JFK and the Unspeakable, with that unspeakable meaning taken from the monk Thomas Merton, the Catholic monk Thomas Merton, by which he meant that you can't even begin to look into this. Because if you did, you would find out something so horrible, so terrible, that it can't be said, it can't even be thought. It is so horrible. It would bring down all of the myths and the illusions that so many people have had about the United States government. And with reverberations, of course, spreading throughout the world. So if we just talk for a few minutes, or if I say a few things about why President Kennedy was killed. When he entered office, he was somewhat of a Cold Warrior, because it was 1960 when he was elected. And to be a politician, you had to be somewhat, in the United States, you had to be somewhat of a Cold Warrior, because we were at the height of the Cold War. But as soon as he took office, actually before he took office, one of the people that he highly respected in the world, Patrice Lumumba, who was a very dynamic new leader in the Congo, a very key country then and now, was assassinated by the CIA about a week before Kennedy actually was sworn in as president. And shortly thereafter, two months or 3 months after his inauguration, the CIA pulled the dirty trick of the Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba, knowing it was going to fail, knowing that the Soviets knew when the invasion was going to take place, and thinking that Kennedy would, at the last minute, being a young guy, he would fold to their pressure to send in US troops into Cuba, but he didn't do that. And of course, they hated him for it and considered him a traitor and a communist and so forth. And then we move on in history, and 1 year later, there's the Cuban Missile Crisis, which almost ended the world, the United States and the Soviet Union, and Kennedy and Khrushchev were able to solve that problem without a war, which was quite miraculous. And Kennedy then started pushing. He realized that there was a death threat on him. A number of the movies, I believe, that Matt will suggest we all watch are tied into this. And Kennedy knew that they were after him, but that's when he really got how shall I say it? He really decided that he was never going to buckle to these people, because he thought they were insane. They wanted to nuke Cuba. They wanted to nuke the Soviet Union. They wanted to have massive deaths, hundreds of millions of deaths all over the world. And he said they're crazy. I'm not doing it. I'm not going in that direction. In fact, he went in the opposite direction, and he said he wanted to abolish nuclear weapons. He wanted to abolish all weapons of war. In a famous speech in June of 1963, I think June 10th, he signed a treaty with the Soviet Union limiting nuclear testing. He put out a memo saying that we're going to withdraw from Vietnam, 1,000 troops. It was National Security Memorandum 263, I believe, that will withdraw 1,000 troops by the end of the year and all troops out of Vietnam by the end of 1965, by 1965. And so the Pentagon, the CIA felt like we have to get rid of this guy. This guy is pushing for peace. He's pushing for the end of war. And that's exactly what they did in Dallas. And they did it in the open. They did it so all the world could see. They did it with impunity. It was quite obvious to anyone with half a brain, even at the time, that Lee Harvey Oswald was not the killer, and that Jack Ruby killed Lee Harvey Oswald to get rid of a trial so that no truth could possibly come out. I won't go into all of the nuances of the assassination because it's why he was killed that is particularly important, but he sure as heck wasn't killed by Lee Harvey Oswald. Some of you may know, and this is a sidebar here, that Lee Harvey Oswald, who was working for the CIA and the FBI, who had been a defector to the Soviet Union, but part of a CIA plan to put defectors in the Soviet Union and then bring them back. He was being run by the CIA the whole time. At one point, Lee Harvey Oswald was in New Orleans, and he went on a TV show where he called himself a Marxist. And then he would distribute leaflets on the street. And the leaflets on the street that he delivered were pro-Castro and anti-Castro. He was playing this double game. And so the sidebar I would like to mention, some of you perhaps have read Graham McQueen, a Canadian author, a great author. His book is the 2001 Anthrax Deception. And in that book, he tells a little story, a story that has to do not with Kennedy's assassination, but with what came to be called 9/11, the attacks of 2001. The official story is that the leading hijacker was a guy named Mohammed Atta. So Graham, in his wonderful book, writes this. He says in 2020, this guy Mohammed Atta he was in Florida, and he went into a what is it? Let me look at my note here. He went into a U.S. Department of Agricultural office.
Ed, did you say 2020 or 2000?
Oh, yes. No, I'm sorry. You got me. Good. No, in 2000. So in May of 2000, a little over a year before 9/11 attacks, he went into a U.S. Department of Agricultural office in Florida. You know, in those offices, they're government offices, and on the wall, of course, a picture of the president of the United States. And he told the woman there that he wanted a loan. First, he said, I want you to know my name is Mohammed Atta, A-T-T-A, A-T-T-A, Mohammed Atta, A-T-T-A. I want to get a loan of $650,000 to buy a crop duster plane. And you may recall what happened after the attacks of 9/11, all the talk about anthrax and crop dusters. And the woman said, well, it's not that easy. You have to fill out an application. Are you a US citizen? And he said, no. And she said, well, then you're going to have to go to a bank and see if and he said, I'm going to come around that counter and slit your neck. I'm going to kill you. And he said, do you know who the greatest man in the world is? A guy named Osama bin Laden. And he said, there's another great man, and he's the leader of Iraq. And his name is Saddam Hussein. And he storms out of the office. Sounds very similar, doesn't it, to Lee Harvey Oswald? This was reported by ABC News. So it's not something that Graham McQueen made up out of whole cloth. It happened, and it's been confirmed. If you think about it for a few minutes, what was that all about? How is that connected to the anthrax attacks in October of 2001? And how does that go back to Oswald and the Kennedy assassination? There's a lot of room to speculate, but it's obvious that both guys were part of a massive intelligence operation. Very, very, very obviously. Well, in any case, to go back to, or to stay there for a moment, if we will, this whole issue of propaganda, and I realize I'm jumping around here, but the issue of propaganda, if you go to the events of 2001, the attacks, and ask yourself, why do we call them 9/11? And at first, I didn't understand that until I started thinking a lot about it. And I believe that the whole 9/11 issue was a massive linguistic mind control operation. Just as the Kennedy situation still is to this very day. But the John Kennedy, I'm not talking about the Robert Kennedy, which is an even bigger mind control operation. But why is it called 9/11? It's very strange to think that a terrible historical tragedy like that would be called by a number. Nothing else is called by a number. But the reason is because it was part of this propaganda effort. The day after the attacks, the future editor of the New York Times, named Bill Keller, wrote an op-ed article in the New York Times saying from now on, I forget the title, from now on we can just say 9/11, 9/11. Why? Because 9/11 is the emergency phone number. Someone's having a heart attack, something bad happened in the US. I'm not sure if it's the same in Canada or other places, but it is in the US. And so this sense of national emergency. And in that article, Keller said, hey, we're all Israelis now. We're all Israelis. Because the Israelis know what it's like to live under this constant emergency with terrorists out to kill you all the time. And he mentioned Israel about 13 or 14 times in that one article. Of course, the next year, Bill Keller became the editor-in-chief of the New York Times. And he was one of the biggest promoters of the Iraq War that you could possibly find. He was a cheerleader from day one. And I could go on further and talk about the other language used, like Pearl Harbor, for example. Again, Matt mentions movies. In 2001, a movie was in production. It was finished, actually, and it was supposed to come out on Memorial Day weekend here in the US, which was late May. And it was this movie, Pearl Harbor. But they put it off until, no, excuse me, I'm getting confused myself. The movie was scheduled to come out in December on the anniversary of Pearl Harbor, of the attacks. But they pushed it up to late May when the movie was premiered. And all summer, 2001, all summer, it was constantly being talked about, this movie, Pearl Harbor, Pearl Harbor, Pearl Harbor, Pearl Harbor. And of course, once the attacks of September 11th happened, that's all they said in the headlines. It's a new Pearl Harbor. It's a new Pearl Harbor. George W. Bush was alleged to have written in his diary, another Pearl Harbor, a second Pearl Harbor. And of course, the group that was pushing for the Iraq War and was pushing for foreign wars was called the Project for the New American Century. These were all these new neocons. And the neocons had been talking, we need a new Pearl Harbor. I'm quoting directly, of course. We need a new Pearl Harbor in order to move the imperial project along. And they got their Pearl Harbor, and they called it Pearl Harbor, another Pearl Harbor. And so people were, this Pearl Harbor idea was there all the time. And then I'll just mention one other part of this linguistic mind control, this very subtle thing. Homeland security, the homeland. They were talking about the homeland. Who was? The Project for the New American Century people were, long before. And then Bush starts talking about the homeland. It's a weird word. It was never ever used in the United States before. It was reminiscent of Nazi Germany. It had that tinge of Hitler and German history during World War II. But then the US developed the Homeland, the Department of Homeland, Security? I forget, it's something like that. You know what it is. And there are other terms as well. This Pearl Harbor, there's the ground zero, a nuclear term. The World Trade Centers were ground zero. Really, ground zero, that's a nuclear war term. It's it's a spot beneath which nuclear weapons are exploded. But 9/11, that nuclear weapons? No, Saddam Hussein might have them. He has weapons of mass destruction. And many of the people involved in all of these events around September 11th are people whose work reverberates down to today, to COVID-19. And this whole issue of anthrax, of germ warfare, of germs being out there to get you, and so forth, and so on. So I could probably go on and on. probably boring myself, if not boring you. But I think it's probably better that I stop at this point, and get you to respond and contribute.
Well, okay. So on that note, I think that the format Ed is going for here is sort of an open process. Usually we do the formal put your name in the queue box, and I call upon you formally. If you want to do that, obviously I won't stop you. Please do. But otherwise, you can just take yourselves off mute, I think, for the most part. And if anybody has a thought to contribute or a question, now's the time.
Matt, I might start with a question, if that's okay.
Yeah, Stephen, of course.
Ed, thanks very much for a short but really fascinating talk. I quite enjoyed it. You hit a few in the start of your talk when you were discussing some of your background and some of the fundamental influences, whether it's the religion or the philosophy or the classics, and you got into religion, propaganda, culture, myths, symbols, and all that good sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Have you or anyone ever thought about that sort of broader thing from Christopher Lasch's culture of narcissism perspective? Because
I have, yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Because, you know, when you formalize what he wrote about, narcissism in theory is scale invariant, and you can apply it at any human collective level. But I can see so many applications. For example, when you noted the use of 9/11 to kind of cement in people's minds what a horrible emergency the tragic event was with the Twin Towers, when you start to think about I'll call it the lifespan of a civilization, if you will, and you get into some psychoanalytic concepts like splitting of the ego, you know, which, you know, might explain the deep state or whatever entities out there. You could argue that it's a much longer lived entity, you know, intergenerational and so forth. And in terms of 9/11, I wonder if when they instituted that system and they named it 9/11 for whatever reason, if there could not have been sufficient forethought that was the actual reason why they named it that they intended to use it for some traumatic event potentially decades down the road, or that there might be an occult dimension to that when you bring in the religion aspect and culture. And I'd just be interested to hear any thoughts you had on Lasch and culture narcissism vis-a-vis what you were talking about, and almost the propaganda being sort of a narcissistic corruption of the truth.
Yeah, well, I think that's a very important book that Christopher Lasch wrote, and that it seems to me there's a massive increase in narcissism, but the narcissists are people who have a very weak sense of themselves, and that's why they're narcissists. And if you think of the development of cell phones and selfies, and people focusing on themselves all the time, and when they do that, they don't see what's going on around them in the world, because their focus is always on me. And I think, if I remember correctly, in Lasch was, I forget what year that book was written, maybe in the early
79?
80s.
79,
When was
perhaps? It? I think 79.
79. Well, that was at the end of a decade that was called the Me Decade. So we have the Vietnam War ending. We have the whole 60s so-called countercultural issue, which took place. And then by 1974, 3, 4, at least in the United States, people had turned inward. They were thinking about their own concerns. I hate to say this because some of you may like to do yoga, but the whole yoga phenomenon and the meditation phenomenon, and, you know, looking at your own belly button, developed in the 70s. And it was a massive turning in, which ended in the election finally of Ronald Reagan, straight out of Hollywood, straight out of a movie, a guy who was an actor playing a president and was just being manipulated by forces much bigger than him. So I think, yeah, the sense of narcissism is huge. And I should say this because I didn't say it. This whole transformation of the symbol system and the myth, the power that once was in the hands, at least in people's minds, of God, the power over life and death, moved into the hands of powerful forces in the world. Those with nuclear weapons, those with the money and the technology and the control, the very wealthy. And when that happened, they could use the fear of death much more easily to control people. And today, it's so evident. After September 11th, people started running to churches and mosques and synagogues and asking God for help. It only lasted a couple of months, which was quite predictable. But that's what they did. And because they were afraid they were going to get killed by these terrorists. And the last almost 2 years now with COVID is this writ large. This germ is out there to get you. And who set it free and who's behind it? Is it the bad Chinese? Well, maybe it's the bad Chinese. I'm being facetious, obviously, but the fear of death and disease for narcissists is like massive. It's like, oh God, I have a headache. I think I have a brain tumor. Obsession with health. There's so many people who are obsessed with their own health these days, and it precedes COVID. So I think you make a very, very good point. Yeah.
Thanks, Ed. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I was thinking about that idea. When you read the writings of a lot of these early stage Cold Warrior architects and social engineers, they're all very obsessed with wanting to sever human society from what they perceive to be the causes of psychological sickness. And it's always pointed out, whether it's G. Brock Chisholm, who starts up the World Health Organization, or what's his name, John Rawlings Rees, the guy who runs Tavistock and then creates the World Federation of Mental Health. It's the family, belief in the family unit, nationalism, the belief that there's something bigger than yourself, or religious conviction. These three things they always zero in on, and you're like, well, why do they say these are the enemies of proper mental health? And it's because these are the most obvious conduits through which the individual expands their identity beyond their senses and their lifespans into something broader, right? Into that thing and when you do that, your fear of death is no longer such a clingy thing. When you situate yourself based on your great grandparents, you have a sense of your great grandchildren that aren't even born yet, a sense of a nation that's bigger than yourself, humanity, God, all of these things. All of a sudden, you're not going to be controlled by a fear of death anymore, and you won't allow your narcissistic components to become the dominant driver of your identity. So it's interesting that they're all zeroing in on that.
Yeah, and if I could respond to that, part of the movement that I'm sure we all see is this movement towards a digital life, an online life, an abstract life, a life through technology, in which people of flesh and blood, we're doing it a little here for a good cause, seeing, at least we're seeing each other's faces, But if we were all in the same room, it would be so much better, of course. But what they're trying to do is to say, we're not really people of flesh and blood, and we are going to be able to download ourselves into machines, and we are machines, and it's all about the brain, and it's all about chemicals, and it's all about drugs, and we're going to achieve this transhumanist world very, very soon. And I think if you look closely at the propaganda underlying everything that's going on, this is where they're pushing us. And the concept of flesh and blood human beings. I mean, you use drones to kill people, but you don't have to see them. The blood is splattered everywhere, but you don't have to see it. It's just technically efficient. And, so I think that's a huge part of this, that we're not like real people anymore. We're, what do you call those things that the Japanese are big into?
Avatars?
What's that?
Avatars or?
Yeah,
Anime?
avatars.
No, I
And this is the Facebook guy. That's what he's pushing. This is total madness. It really is insane, but they don't think it's insane. That is the really marvelous thing about this, how crazy it is.
Hmm.
Comment if,
Liz.
thank you. Liz Gould, my husband's name is the one up there, obviously. I did want to bring up an aspect of this idea of, the spiritual nature of the world is really not owned by one group of people, known as the good people. And then everyone who basically disagrees with you become the bad people. When we get caught up in that kind of analysis, I think we actually contribute to our own dilemma as, quote, the good people. I think we really have to broaden our concept of what the real problem is when we think, one of the arguments that I always find interesting is when you get people who believe that they own the proper interpretation of the Bible. Okay, and I read an article where a very religious Orthodox judge had made the comment that she was against homosexuals because it was in the Bible. So someone came back with a response and basically said, well, so is slave ownership and all the other things that are in the Bible. And then you realize that, everyone gets to choose. It's, I think it was once termed being a cafeteria Catholic, and that was supposedly not allowed. But guess what? I think that's the reality. I think we all make those choices. So I think that, if we really have the capacity to open up and listen to the other and really hear it. We're way downstream in terms of the struggle. I'm not saying that this is an easy situation just to resolve, but we have had it for so long. This crisis between who owns the word of God, whose interpretation is totally correct. Well, in a way, when you consider that, these are all the effectively, it's like the children of God itself are fighting over who owns dad. Okay. And this kind of constant back and forth doesn't seem to get us anywhere. So I think in my first effort, I know when we've done a lot of work, my husband and I, on the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and that dealt with Zbigniew Brzezinski and his role with Carter, and that is, for many people, view Brzezinski as the embodiment of practically evil. And, we would end up in a lot of interviews where people would basically describe him that way. And we would have to say, we don't want that kind of framing, because we know it's part of the problem itself. Somehow we have to find a different way of looking at, I bring this up as a point. Why is there a god of thieves, Hermes? Why is there the father of lies? We have these mythical figures that exist for a reason. And I do believe, honestly, if the truth was really large enough, nobody would need to use the lie. Somehow we got lost a long time ago. Anyway, if you'd like to comment on that idea.
Yeah, I would like to, Liz, and I think you and Paul have done wonderful work, and I hold you in high esteem for what you've done, both of you. I think that you take Brzezinski, for example. Yeah, well, he's dead now. And was he the personification of evil? Well, I don't think, I got to be careful here. Anyone is, because everyone is capable of change. And I was recently interviewed by Bobby Kennedy Jr., and we were talking about Fauci, Anthony Fauci. And I think I said this, but I may be mistaken, but I think it. Anthony Fauci, I believe, has done many evil things, and but he's capable of changing, like we all are. So you have to always keep that in mind. But I don't judge Anthony Fauci except by what I perceive to be and understand his actions. In fact, just like Brzezinski, who I think did many evil things. Is he totally evil? No one is. Everyone's a mixture for sure. And so I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, we do have to kind of point out the evil things people are doing.
I agree with you on that 100%. It's about pointing out the evil that's done, but when you humanize it, I think that's where we get into trouble. And especially when we question people's intentions, because the use of force I consider to be the problem. And when you start using it for the good, if you keep using force, eventually you will use it for evil. It's the use of force itself, I think, that is our challenge to identify. Yeah.
Agree. I agree.
Jerry?
Yes. Oh, hi. Yes. Thanks, Mr. Curtin. That was very interesting. I wanted to go back to something you said when you were talking with Stephen, because, the last couple of years I've been watching the propaganda around COVID, and I came to the conclusion that it seems the purpose of the media is simply to scare the crap out of us every day and try to, come up with something new tomorrow. But when you said the fear of death was used to control people, it was like a light bulb going on in my head, because it seems that's exactly what they've been doing with this COVID thing, is using this fear of death to manipulate the way they want people to respond, to act. Now, I know it's an old thing. It goes back even to the threat of nuclear war and building the bomb shelters and all that. But this is a real sophisticated use of it. And I was wondering where you came up with that idea, where you saw this using the fear of death, and if you could elaborate on that a little more.
Sure. Yeah. Well, probably it comes out of my own fear of death as a child, which I think everyone feels, and then somehow it goes away. It doesn't go away, but they find ways to submerge that fear. But I think that fear is with us all always. And in any case, when I was young, I thought I would die by the age of 21. I can't tell you why I thought that. And then I turned 21 and I didn't die. And then I thought, well, I didn't die at 21. I'll probably be dead by 24. And then I turned 24 and I was still alive. And then I pushed it back a couple more years. And I did this till about the age of 29, but I was still going, right? And I became very, very interested in this issue of death and the fear of death. And I, as a, you know, as an academic, as an intellectual, I developed a course in the early 1970s called The Sociology of Life, Death, and Meaning. And I believe it was the first course on that subject in the United States. This is around the time of the Kubler-Ross, that famous book on death and dying. But my view was much bigger. And I remember at the university where I was teaching, my other department members said, "You can't teach that. That's not sociology." And I said, "Well, I am going to teach it, whether you think I should or not. And it is sociology. It's a very broad study. It's not. I'm not using statistics. I'm looking at it from a broad cultural and historical perspective, and the first semester I taught it, 230 students signed up for it because I knew even then there was this thirst for meaning. These students had gone through this very weird period as younger people of the 1960s with all the countercultural stuff, much of which, by the way, I believe was an intelligence operation from the use of LSD, from all of the esoteric beliefs that were proffered then, the so-called New Age stuff, and so forth. But in any case, that's where my interest in this came from, and it just developed over the years. And in the first book I used in that course was a book that everyone should read, I believe. It's called The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker, which won the Pulitzer Prize in 1974. It's a book so good that it's hard to describe this book. And so that's where it all started. And somewhere along the line for me, because of the things I was involved in, I was in the Marines as a young man, and I became a conscientious objector. I had been trained by Jesuit priests, and then I met who became my mentor, a Jesuit priest who was profoundly influential in my life, named Father Daniel Berrigan, who was you probably know who he is if you know some of that history. And so I quickly got over my fear of death, even though I kept pushing that date. And it had something to do with my religious upbringing, of course, which never left me and which is with me to this very day. I couldn't really live in this world without the spiritual sustenance of my faith, not in an institutionally affiliated way very much anymore, but it's what informs my life. And so all the work I do, the things I'm talking about here, are connected to that.
There was if I could just share one little observation of something a bit disturbing I saw 3 days ago on YouTube. It was about a 1 hour clip of a bit of a brainwashing session conducted by Sir Richard Dawkins, who was somehow invited into a classroom of 14 and 15-year-old students at some religious high school. And it makes you question the nature of the chancellor or the principal of the school that would allow that to happen and be filmed. And the whole point was for him to educate the students why the belief in any idea of God is unscientific quackery. And it was basically him dealing with, about 20 young people who didn't have fully formed concepts of theology. Obviously, they're 14, 15, right? You're not going to develop a deeply intellectual support for any idea of faith. A lot of it is going to be based on, my family's doing, it's in the Bible, it's in the Quran. So there wasn't like a lot of strength on their side to throw back at his little idiotic bombs where he was just trying to blow up their faith. And by the end of this 1 hour experience, this thing has millions of views. He was being, celebrated as this great liberator of the students who now can live their lives freely without the burden of guilt and shame and all of the other things that religion puts on us. And it was really just terrible because, and I was thinking about also my own in college. We had a psychology student, professor, who was basically, he had 200 students in front of him in this massive auditorium saying that the one common denominator, that was the big lesson in almost every lecture he gave, the common denominator amongst all human beings is the fear of death. That's the only thing is true. Everything else is subjective, but the fear of death is constant. And it's like, if that's really where you're at, you can always be manipulated by a whole bunch of things because you will never know who and why you are. Like you'll never have access to your purpose if you believe, nihilistically in a purposeless universe that's cold, and ultimately your only purpose is to find pleasure and avoid pain, making you kind of like somebody who could be manipulated by a behaviorist very easily.
And if you flip it, Matt, what this professor kept saying negates the other saying that love conquers death. What's love have to do with this? To quote a song, there's no love, and it's all about fear. But maybe we need a little bit more love.
Well, I think that there is, a balance, obviously, and we know that, the whole thing about right and left, up and down, black and white. But when you put it in terms good and evil, things change. So duality is very present in everything, but somehow at this intellectual level and this consciousness level, we struggle desperately to figure out how to maintain what we believe in the face of many, many, many interests, many people, many circumstances that don't necessarily agree with us for any number of reasons. So I think that the problem, truthfully, though, lies, I think what I said before about it lies in the use of force. Okay, when you have the right, as I think it's stated in the Hegelian dialectic, that the state basically has the right to do exactly what's happening right now in this COVID event. Okay, that is the claim of the state. It gets to use violence effectively. And we're living, in this reality, and it's been played over and over again for, I always like to bring up what happened to the Japanese Americans in World War II. They were put in concentration camps for simply being Japanese Americans. So we know that the state is very capable of doing all kinds of things, but I think what's shocking us now is that they figured out not only how to do that in the first place, but how to create endless war, which gives them the right to then constantly use the power of the state to force us to do anything. So I think that I guess I'm just suggesting that we've got to look in some other places about where the source of the problem is coming from, and how do we tackle this problem of the use of force and get that out of the dialogue. At least
I would want to answer that, because if you go back, Liz, the assassination of President Kennedy is so important because what it tells us is that the state is saying anyone who moves towards non-force, non-violence, we are going to eliminate. They are dead on arrival. And 2 years after that, when Malcolm X moved in this new direction towards Martin Luther King and nonviolence, they eliminated him. And then they eliminated Bobby Kennedy and MLK a few years later. These were people who were standing for a new kind of world, a world where force and violence had to stop, and love and understanding and shared perspectives and dialogue needed to replace it. And the state said, no, no, no. Look what we can do. And in the case of JFK, the lesson was sent loud and clear. Any president, anyone who gets elected, we will blow your damn head off if you dare to stop this juggernaut. We will blow your head off. And then they did the same to these other guys. A lot of people don't know the truth about the Robert Kennedy assassination, but it's so obvious that it was a CIA hit job. It's mind-boggling. And many people don't know about MLK either. They just don't know. They teach lies in the schools. They have an MLK Day of Service here in the United States. It's a joke. It was something pushed through by the US Congress to make sure that we don't emphasize the fact that he was a radical, nonviolent warrior for a new world, and that the state killed him, assassinated this man. So, let's just, have an MLK Day.
Well, I do think that my point would be that is exactly our challenge, that if we don't get to use force to counter force, then what do? That's what we're here talking about. But we have to do a lot more of that. And we have to wrestle with the reality of what it means to create ideas that are so powerful they can melt the ability of these people to get away with simply using force to have their way, which is, I think, is where we are right now. We are at an extreme moment worldwide of the use of force by practically every state in the world. So this is definitely our moment to, I think, think about how do we empower the not using the force so much that it can actually challenge and reverse this control.
Ed, a couple of months ago, you had an article about reporting and the dangers of reporting, and actually you, in terms of, I think you started out by talking about the lines somehow your younger colleagues need to cross. I think specifically there was a mention of Matt Taibbi and Glenn Greenwald at the end as being sort of borderline on some issues. And when you talk about death threats and people like the Kennedys and also about Martin Luther King, it's also the Michael Hastings came to a very untimely death, linked to just about a week before he had an expose on John Brennan, I believe. So it goes beyond blacklisting even for reporters. It seems that there's a physical threat. And I wonder if you could comment some on that. And then have you ever sensed this yourself?
You're asking me, right, Bob?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I've never felt it myself. I know that Michael Hastings, and this is kind of interesting. He had just written a long piece. It was on General Crystal. What's his name? Crystal, right? what's his first name? Help me
Stanley?
here. What's it?
Stanley? No?
Yeah, Stanley Crystal, who was the head of US forces in Afghanistan. So Mike Hastings had gone there, and then he wrote this piece, which, you know, sent Crystal off the wall. But and I believe that's a very, very, very suspicious death in that car in LA where he died. But it's interesting to note that Stanley Crystal is now involved in the vaccine and the COVID movement. And I mean, you know, it's quite extraordinary. And he's involved with both Republicans and Democrats who are working, you know, together with this thing. But the other guys you mentioned, Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi, I just think that, you know, they do some really great stuff, but they just won't go to certain places. Chris Hedges is another guy that I put in that category, and they won't really write about September 11th, and they won't dare touch any of the assassinations of the 60s. And I think they're all kind of under the influence of Noam Chomsky, who is what I think of as the godfather of this group, who said the Kennedy assassination doesn't matter. It's insignificant. And that the attacks of September 2001 are not that important either. And I don't want to discuss them and blah, blah, blah. And now he says with COVID, this is Chomsky, those who don't get vaccinated should be put in isolation camps. And this is, you know, a guy who's done some really good stuff over the years. And but he won't touch these issues. And so the question is, why don't these writers who do many good things, why won't they go there? I don't know why. I can't read their minds. I don't have any inside information, but the facts speak for themselves. They won't. They won't. Again, I go back to what I said about Fauci. I just go on what Fauci's done over the last 30 years, the facts. I can't read his mind. You know, we went to the same high school, Fauci and I. He's older than I am. We were trained by the same Jesuit priests. I know the system inside out. I was there. I know what he went through. You know, he's a working class kid from Brooklyn. I'm a working class kid from the Bronx. And we went to the same school. We had many of the same teachers and so forth. I don't know what motivates him. I can't read his mind. What is it? Fear, money? People are getting threatened. I'm sure that some of these people might have been threatened. I don't know. It's a good question, but how do you answer it? I can't.
The blacklisting is a threat, is a pretty big threat in itself, just from any kind of media. And now I think they're talking about, I forget the platform that Taibbi and Greenwald write on, but they're threatening that as some kind of a Russian prop. For a prop for Russian, a platform for
Substack.
propaganda. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Did you want to address that, or can I was going to share a quick thought too, based on some of the stuff you said about Chomsky.
No, I'm done.
Okay. I was thinking I had taken a long time ago a Chomsky linguistics course, and one of the points driven home by the professor was that there is no place for metaphysics in a proper science of and they were trying to attempt to develop a theory of universal deep structure grammar. And that's where before Chomsky got political or became known for his political writings, he was, he made himself famous for his theories on this idea of grammar that used a computer as the model, the analog for what a human mind is, because he was a follower of Marvin Minsky and the whole cybernetics Norbert Wiener crowd that all said, computers now, binary computers and linear systems give us a perfect model to model the human mind, economies, ecosystems, the universe. Great, and anybody who trains their mind for years and years and years in that way and makes their minds work like a computer, because you could choose to do that, right? They increasingly don't believe in things that are non-expressible in a computer, like justice or anything metaphysical, the soul, anything that transcends something you can measure, weigh, put in a number chart or a data set and input into the program. Anything that defies that doesn't really exist. And if you don't believe it exists, it could be staring you right in the face. I remember telling my dad once that we needed orange juice. I was like 12 years old, and I was so convinced that we didn't have orange juice in the fridge. And he was like, "No, I'm pretty sure we have orange juice." And I looked in the fridge, opened up the door, and I was like, "No, there's no orange juice." I was so convinced. And then he gets home with a bottle of orange juice and opens the fridge door, and there's no orange juice right there. And I couldn't see it because I was so convinced that there was no orange juice. So later on, when I encountered the Chomsky ideas in universal grammar, why would he be so offended in the idea of metaphysics, which is where intentions are, right? Ideas like intention exists outside of the effects of intention. If you don't believe it, you don't see it. That's just a conspiracy theory that is not scientific. It's not, there's no, so anyway, that was my theory on like why Chomsky had all of these terrible, because I don't think he was necessarily lying, I don't think, when he said what he said about his belief that looking for a conspiracy outside of the Warren Commission assessment or around 9/11 is useful. But I just don't think he believes that intentions are knowable.
I've seen
Did I
other
respond to
sites
that?
go that way.
No, Bob, go on. No, Bob, you.
I was thinking of a consortium since Robert Parry died. It was taken over by, I forget who the editor is now.
Joe Lauria.
Joe Lauria, and he's much more conservative. They want to keep all discussion around Russiagate, where they're very good at, and I use them all the time because they've got wonderful archives. But at the same time, there was just something that Joe Lauria won't go beyond, and a certain thing. I cut off a lot of the comments, and it's very, very restricted now as far as the website goes. You can go in certain areas, but don't talk about the pandemic,
Right.
and don't talk about. It was a couple at 9/11. I don't think they go into that much either. So it is restrictive, but yet still good. And so is the gray zone, and of course Matt's site. But other than that, we have some lights out there, but I think they're trying to put them out gradually.
I do want to make one quick point about
One-
Robert
one-
Perry. I heard Robert Perry would not talk about 9/11 either. So Joe Lauria there may be things that weren't there in the first place. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, I don't remember that as far as, but you may be right in terms of not talking about it at that point. But I think he was the type that would kind of wait till some more evidence came out. But I don't think he ran away from it.
Yeah, I think, Bob, I think he did. I think Liz is right.
Yeah.
And I think,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm quite certain of that, but I may be wrong and Liz may be wrong, but
Well,
we
I
could
got it
all-
from someone who had direct contact with him on that issue, so.
Okay.
The person that told me had direct contact with Robert Perry on it, yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
and to go back to what Matt was saying. Now I forget what Matt was saying.
Okay.
Um,
Chomsky's not too bright. That's
Oh, yeah, Chomsky. So to go back to Chomsky, I know for a fact through the people who were involved with Chomsky, this is in the 1960s, after the Kennedy assassination. Chomsky was given a whole batch of documents about that questioned the assassination. And he refused to go into it.
Oh,
So this is in the 60s.
oh, that's early on. Okay,
And what-
that's a new variable that does throw my a wrench into my hypothesis.
Yeah, and one of the early critics, the very early critics, a fundamentally important guy who just died. He was a friend of mine. His name is Vince Salandria. He's a lawyer from Philadelphia who also confronted All-Inspector early on. He's the magic bullet guy who was part of the Warren Commission as an investigator. Became a long-term senator in Pennsylvania. But Vince Salandria had many back and forths with Chomsky back in the 60s. And I don't know if Chomsky remembers them or forgets them or wants to forget them, but yeah, he refused to go there from the start. And the other thing I would say too, for all of these people, they want careers, and they don't want to lose their career, and they don't want to lose their access to audiences.
Mm.
And I think a lot of them make a lot of money. I don't know. I mean, I'm just guessing. But when you're trying to protect your career and your moolah and your audience, you're reluctant to go into certain subjects.
And then there's Jimmy Dore. Anybody watch him?
But Bob, we have a few other questions in the queue. Okay.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry.
That's all good. No, I know Satomi and Sanjay have been waiting for a while. Satomi, or no, I think Sanjay I saw first. So Sanjay, did you have a question?
Yes, thanks, Ed. So my question is, as many of us can see, that the propaganda machine is very, very powerful, is very well funded, and controls most of the information channels. Is there any chance that this propaganda machine can be reversed or countered? And if there is, what will constitute the mechanism of doing that?
Well, I think just what we're doing here is an important thing. I think people speaking out, not going into hiding, saying what they think, creating dialogue, getting together with like-minded people and trying to tell the truth. I mean, we have someone like Assange. They're going to kill him. They're trying to, and to shut him up. And but he's just like, how shall I put it? He's not you or me or any of us here. He's the founder of WikiLeaks and put out a lot of important stuff. But I think what we can do on a fundamental level, just as human beings and as regular people, is keep talking, keep sharing, and try to open people's minds to different ways of thinking about things, to get out of this hypnotic state that so many people are in. I think we're hypnotized, and this is this is MK Ultra on a massive scale. You know, the CIA's MK Ultra program, and it's done to mass media and cell phones. You know, I'm obsessed with the cell phone issue. I think it's one of the most evil inventions ever.
Pip, since I know you had a question much earlier, and by the way, for those listening, take note. Pip is the editor-in-chief of Africa Agenda website. Did I get your website? Is that the Africa Agenda?
Yeah, africanagenda.net.
Yes, and Pip will be delivering next week's lecture, which will tackle some of these Pan-Africanists working with Kennedy in the 1960s, and a lot more too. So that's just a little thing to keep in the back of your mind as a plug, which is why I'm also going to ask you, Pip, did you want to say a little bit something about Lumumba or Kwame Nkrumah or anything like that?
Well, I'd love to just mention to Ed that this, you know, you were saying about this development from 9/11 onwards, and it's kind of like this thing creeps up gradually, doesn't it? It goes along and along really slowly, and then suddenly bang, something happens, and then off we go again, along and along, and then another thing's going to happen, bang, and things change. And they did this, and you were saying how people who call for peace and a change in the world, it's, you know, tickets instantly. And they did this with the Organization of African Unity. So going back to 1962, the leader of Egypt, Nasser, and Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, Secretary of Guinea, Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, these a class of African leadership that was so astonishingly outstanding, brilliant-minded men came together to form the Organization of African Unity. And what stood out about them was that they were demanding an instant change. So like Kennedy, they were saying, we're not having economic development in 20 years' time. We want it next week. And we start doing it next week. And they got knocked off, every single last one of them. I mean, Nasser died of a heart attack, but he was only 52. And I think they literally worked him to death. You know, the stress that they put him under killed him. But they were opposing gradualism. And gradualism could almost be seen as a strategy. So when those African leaders said, we want things to change right now, they had they had proxy African leadership come in and say, actually Africa's not ready for these huge changes. We have to train people and stuff like that. So, you know, it all must happen at a more graceful, peaceful rate. And of course, this was gradualism. And that's what African leadership adopted, that policy, in contrast to what those great men had called for and demanded, which was an instant change. And that certainly comes into what you were saying, Ed, about anyone coming out and demanding a new paradigm, that they get removed very, very, very quickly. But that was what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And this question of, you'll eventually have development in 40, 50 years. Just wait. Well, we promise. Just be patient. that never works. um, Yeah.
One of those leaders who was being trained, one of those gradual leaders, let's call him that, was Barack Obama's father,
Mm.
who was part of a CIA program to bring young prospective African leaders to the United States to train them. And he was brought in a program to the University of Hawaii, to the East-West Center, where he was trained.
Mhm.
And that was Mr. Obama's father. And there's much more to that story, but I will not, go into it now.
Sorry. It is that YALI, the Young African Leaders Initiative. Is it
What did you say?
Is it the Young African Leaders Initiative?
Is that what it was called?
I don't know. Can you remember the name of it?
I don't remember the name of it, no, but it was sponsored by the United States and the University of Hawaii, and in particular, the East-West Center was a hotbed for the CIA in Asia. And he was trained there, and he's Barack Obama's biological father. And then by a quick turn of simple twist of fate, it so happens, being facetious, obviously, his stepfather was a military man in the Indonesian army who went back to Indonesia in 1965 from Hawaii to help the slaughter of communists by the new people who wanted to control Indonesia, and did a massive slaughter. Quite a story.
That program is still up and running and doing really well. It's called YALI nowadays. So what you're talking about now is now called YALI. And that was started under Obama, the Young African Leaders Initiative. And that got really, really big when Obama went to South Africa in 2013.
Yeah.
And then the Nelson Mandela Foundation became a huge part of that. It's monstrously corrupt, the foundation. It's been completely taken over from anything to do with Nelson Mandela. And it links into the African Union. So they run these leadership programs that link into the African Union, in case you ever wonder why the African Union is so utterly inept at doing anything. That has a lot to do with it.
This is a good, oh, sorry, yeah, finish thought, but this is a good teaser for your next class next week.
Okay, yeah. But what she called Greta Thunberg. So she comes from Havas, the advertising agency that started the One campaign. And the One campaign produce influencers. So that's Greta Thunberg's background. But the One campaign are also into this, the young leaders. So it's One Young Leaders, Young African Leaders Initiative. They're all intermingling. But that's so interesting that you say that Barack Obama's father was running the forerunner of that program. So that's
part of that program.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, and this is why it's so important, I think, also to always think about the next generation, because the oligarchy certainly is always thinking a few generations ahead, at least. Sometimes, I mean, often, unfortunately, much longer. And the good people, oftentimes, I think that the sad thing is you often have these amazing singularities of wonderful souls who rise and take the personal responsibility of the time that they're alive onto themselves. And they do amazingly wonderful and necessary things, but when they die, it's too rarely found to be the case that they have a youth process or people that have been cultivated to carry up and take on the mission and pick up the torch. Ben Franklin, in a certain sense, did do a pretty good job after he died. There was still momentum and there was a cultivation of qualified, mature characters who could take on leadership responsibility. But yeah, I think we have to really think about as well transmitting these ideas generationally to the younger generations. The way the oligarchy's got a bit of a head start on that one, which is bad, but it's good to shift our minds into that orientation too. Because I worry about people who of Greta Thunberg's age and other young recipients of Rhodes scholarships who just have no idea how the world actually works by design, by going through these renowned programs. Yeah, so something to think about. But on that note, Satomi, I know you've been waiting for a long time. So go for it. You can ask your question.
Well, I don't mind, because I think what Pip was sharing, and it's so important. I'd love to hear more. I think we need to hear more about Obama too, Ed, about because we don't hear a lot about the real truth behind it. So, anyways, thank you so much for your JFK insights. But what I wanted to comment was on. I have a comment and a question. Is I think we really underestimate the power of love. And especially in the biblical sense, where it says, that that love is perfect. Love casts out all fear, and that the power of life and death is in the tongue. In the use of the tongue. And I think that when you start to really believe that you can apply that, you can actually experience that kind of love. We really need to believe that those truths in the Bible are not there just for us to kind of think about and, wishful thinking, but they're truths that can be experienced. And I really do believe that. And the lovely thing about that, the divine love, is that there's 4 dimensions to it. Now, we only know 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions. And I think that kind of a love will penetrate, like that hypnotic state can penetrate and break that hypnotic trance as well. So I just wanted to, mention that, because that metaphysical part, we really underestimate the power of it. And I think that, and same with 9/11, like Amos 9/11 is all about the tabernacle of David, and that is all about worship. So those 2 things, worship and love, are very powerful images for us to experience, not just think about, but experience. And I wanted to thank Susan for that covenant, talking about covenant last week. Again, that's another powerful, the whole Bible is covenant. So my question is, Thomas Merton, you were talking about Thomas Merton in the beginning. What relation does Thomas Merton have with JFK? Did he write a book about it?
No, he didn't write a book. Thomas Merton, who was a Trappist monk in the 1960s, well, before that, of course, since the 1940s, he was in correspondence with members of the Kennedy family, Robert Kennedy's wife, especially, from his monastery. And when John Kennedy became president, he didn't hold out great hope for him at first. And then he said it would take a miracle for Kennedy to change, which actually happened. But Merton didn't write a book about him. And incidentally, Thomas Merton was he died in December of 1968, the same year as MLK and Robert Kennedy. And he was a vehement anti-war voice in the United States, even from a monastery in Kentucky. And there are those who say he was assassinated, again, by the CIA. He died in a bizarre accident. There's a book by two guys, David Martin and Hugh Turley, about Thomas Merton's death. And I should mention this, if you want to know about Obama, there's a book by Jeremy Kosmaroff called Obama's Wars, published by Clarity Press, which should be a must read because it paints a factual picture of Barack Obama's 8 years in office. It's a really good book.
Oh, thank you for that. And yeah, I know, I always kind of suspected Thomas Merton might have been assassinated. And I thank you for that. And I was committed my life to Jesus Christ on his death, December 10th. So I always, remember him.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
On that note, my mom has shared a couple of very useful thoughts that I thought round out some of the questions on the fear of death issue, but a lot more regarding fear more generally that we've been weaving in and out of this conversation. So you want to share those?
Okay, well, one is because I also am Christian, but I find this world, especially in the Western world, Christianity is very weak. And I think if we look at the Bible, it says, and this is a quote from Hilary Price, there are 366 commands to fear not in the Bible. That's one for every day of the year, including the leap year. So that's my one thought on fear. And Christians today, and I think it's a general thing, everybody is afraid of death. And as long as we're living in fear and that we don't grasp the idea that we're not supposed to be fearful, we'll easily catch any propaganda that comes around because we're not thinking with reason. Reason shuts down when there's fear. So that's one of the comments. And then on love, I think in today's society, love has become an adjective that goes with our feelings. I love you, and it's an emotion. Whereas love is actually a verb. So love is a verb. And sometimes to do something, to love somebody, is to do something that's hard and painful. And then, even after you've done something hard and painful, then you feel satisfaction. So there is an emotion tied to it, but it's an action first, emotion second. And I think our society has twisted that around. That was it for my comments.
Thank you so much, Susan.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought that was a good edifying concept to spiritually chew on. I just saw another, go off there. What's up?
I was just going to say too, like Jesus, when he died, so the people who killed him, as he dies, he says, Lord, forgive them for they know not what they do. So even Jesus, the forgiveness, like we're not to judge anybody. That's not our job as human beings. We do not judge anybody. We don't know what their motives are. So that's one of the things. And there is another thing that ties into that. And it's a prayer that we should pray, that it was a prayer 2,000 years ago, that open the eyes and ears of their heart so that they'll understand, so that they'll hear, right? Because they don't see, they don't hear because of the propaganda. So our prayers should be to open, it's the metaphysical, it's open the eyes of their heart, open the eyes of the ears of their heart. So that's just another, we want to force people to change instead of trying to get them to open their eyes and ears. I'm finished.
Can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So it's sort of, there's a lot of water that people should want to have and to drink there, and they don't know that this is actually what they should want. So we have to help them realize that they should want this. You can't force them. Yeah. I know, Ed, you have any parting thoughts or anything? I think that we've rounded the end of the question period.
No, I think that, well, maybe I do. I don't know. What are my thoughts? Ed, what are you thinking? Now I'm talking to myself. I think this is a wonderful group of people, and the comments and the dialogue are very encouraging to me. I don't think we have any sharp differences. We have little differences probably, but the only way you can resolve them is by talking and learning and open your mind and hearts, as Susan just said, to other people's perspectives. And love is an action. It's a doing, and like everything is a doing. It's what people do. It's not what they say. So we could talk till we're blue in the face, but it doesn't really matter. It's what we do. But actually, talking is a doing too, isn't it? Life's a doing. There's a word, by the way, the actual Greek word for God. I'll end with this. I forget what the Greek word is, but it's a verb, and God is a doing, and we're a doing, and that's what we do. We live.
That's good. Yeah, qualitative change. And that's I think the thing that people who think like a computer, they have a big problem with qualitative change, because a computer model or a computer can only sort of change in a linear way based on whatever you put into that program. But it can't completely transform its entire quality of existence. It can't think in a qualitatively better way. Whereas a human being, we can that's one of the most beautiful distinguishing characteristics of us, when we're being humble and we're tied to an honest intention within ourselves, which loves truth more than our personal egos or fame or fortune or whatever. And we're able to then all of a sudden have insights and make leaps that are nonlinear into discovery concepts that we can translate and communicate through art, through science, and everything else that benefits all of humanity that we're a microcosm of. So it's a really beautiful idea. And that puts the act of learning into that quality of action, because you're building up a power instead of just sort of putting things into your head as facts and trivia, which don't really allow you a power of changing. You could maybe have a power of, at the very least, maybe playing the role of a cog in an already existent machine, but you don't really have a power of designing something better if that machine is broken and you're told to adapt to it. That doesn't make for good psychological health. So yeah, I think this is really good. This is a good process, and I'm very happy that you, Ed, were generous enough to give your time and energy and insight to share in this very, very fruitful Sunday conversation. And I thank everybody for participating in it. Next week, we have Pip, as I already said, who's going to be ending out the last lecture of the year on Africa and a lot more. So I'll send out the invitation, which people can share around to their immediate friends and family. And I think that'll be a good way to celebrate new year and begin the new year with hope and trepidation, but more hope than trepidation going into some very, very unknown circumstances. So thank you, everybody, for coming on today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much. Thank
Bye.
Merry Christmas to you. We won't, if we don't see
Merry
you.
Christmas, right, everybody? Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas.
Yes.
Feliz Navidad.